For 300,000 years, our species survived without a single tool that required a battery. No GPS, no waterproof jackets, no freeze-dried meals sealed in foil. Just bone, stone, plant fiber, and an extraordinary accumulation of knowledge passed from one generation to the next, through nothing more than observation, repetition, and survival. We crossed deserts. We endured ice ages. We colonized every landmass on Earth except Antarctica. And we did it all with our hands, our eyes, and a set of skills so refined that modern science is only now beginning to understand how sophisticated they truly were. And then, in the span of a few thousand years, we forgot nearly all of it. The scale of that loss is difficult to overstate. For roughly 97% of our history as a species, every single human being on Earth possessed a working knowledge of fire making, water finding, shelter construction, plant identification, wound treatment, celestial navigation, and weather prediction. This was not specialist knowledge. It was baseline competence, the minimum requirement for staying alive. A child raised in a Paleolithic band would have mastered skills by the age of 12 that would qualify as advanced wilderness expertise in any modern survival course. By adulthood, that same individual could read a landscape the way a literate person reads a page, fluently, automatically, and with an intuitive understanding of structure that went far beyond the surface. Today, the average adult in an industrialized country would struggle to start a fire without a lighter, find drinkable water without a map, or navigate a forest without a phone signal. We have outsourced our survival instincts to technology so completely that a dead battery can turn a weekend hike into a genuine emergency. Search and rescue teams across North America respond to thousands of incidents per year in which the primary cause of distress is not injury, not weather, not wildlife, but disorientation, people who simply do not know where they are. But the knowledge our ancestors carried is not lost. It is encoded in the archaeological record, in the practices of indigenous peoples who never abandoned it, and in the fundamental physics of the natural world, which has not changed since the Pleistocene. The plants that stopped bleeding in 40,000 BC still stop bleeding today. The stars that guided migration across the Bering Land bridge still point north. The principles of heat retention that kept our ancestors alive through the last ice age still govern every emergency shelter built in every survival manual ever printed. What follows are 7 of the most powerful survival techniques our prehistoric ancestors mastered. Techniques that took tens of thousands of years to develop and that remain, to this day, as effective as any modern equivalent. The first, and arguably the most transformative, is the mastery of fire. Not merely the ability to create it, but the profound understanding of how to control it in every condition. We tend to imagine early fire-making as a crude act, 2 sticks rubbed together by desperate hands. The reality was anything but crude. Archaeological evidence from sites across Africa, Europe, and Southeast Asia reveals that by at least 400,000 years ago, our ancestors had developed a systematic approach to combustion that involved precise material selection, atmospheric awareness, and thermal management. The key was not the spark, the key was the tinder. Prehistoric firemakers understood something that most modern campers do not, that the material you ignite first matters more than the tool you use to ignite it. Birch bark, dried fungus, cattail fluff, the inner bark of cedar. Each of these materials has a remarkably low ignition point and a fibrous structure that catches and holds an ember. The Iceman, Ötzi, who died in the Alps roughly 5,300 years ago, was carrying a pouch containing fragments of true tinder fungus, Fomes fomentorius, along with iron pyrite and flint for spark generation. This was not improvisation. It was a kit, a refined, portable, field-tested survival system that would work in rain, wind, and sub-zero temperatures. But the deeper skill was in fire placement. Our ancestors understood convection, wind channels, heat reflection from stone surfaces, and the insulating properties of different soils, all without a single page of thermodynamics. A fire built against a rock wall radiates heat forward. A fire built in a shallow pit resists wind. A fire built on a platform of green logs above wet ground will not drown. These are principles that modern bushcraft instructors teach today, and every one of them was discovered, through trial, error, and necessity, by people who had no other option. The second technique is the ability to find water by reading the landscape. In a survival situation, dehydration kills faster than starvation, faster than exposure, faster than almost anything except catastrophic injury. Our ancestors knew this intimately, and they developed an astonishing capacity to locate water sources using nothing but terrain observation and biological indicators. The principle is deceptively simple. Water flows downhill. It collects in low points. It follows the path of least resistance. But applying this principle in unfamiliar terrain requires the kind of spatial reasoning that our species spent hundreds of thousands of years perfecting. Converging animal tracks almost always lead to water. The presence of certain plants, willows, cottonwoods, cattails, reeds, signals a water table close to the surface. Insect behavior changes near moisture. Bees fly in straight lines toward water sources within 5 kilometers. And columns of ants often march toward hidden condensation. Birds like finches and pigeons drink at dawn and dusk and fly low and direct toward water when thirsty. In arid environments, our ancestors went further. They dug seep wells in dry riverbeds, understanding that water often persists below the surface long after the channel has gone dry. The San people of southern Africa, whose ancestors practiced these techniques for at least 100,000 years, still use sip wells, narrow holes dug in sand, fitted with a hollow reed, through which water is slowly drawn up by mouth. This is not primitive technology. This is hydrology applied with surgical precision by people whose lives depended on getting it right every single time. The third technique is shelter construction based on thermoregulation. The understanding that survival in the outdoors is fundamentally a battle against heat loss. Hypothermia is the most common killer in wilderness emergencies, and our ancestors understood its mechanics with a depth that most modern hikers do not. The critical insight was insulation from the ground. The earth conducts heat away from a human body roughly 25 times faster than still air. Prehistoric peoples across every climate zone prioritize ground insulation over roof construction. A thick bed of dry leaves, pine needles, or grass between the body and the soil does more to preserve core temperature than any overhead cover. Archaeological sites from Upper Paleolithic Europe, dating to 30,000 years ago, show evidence of sleeping platforms raised on bone frameworks and padded with animal hides. That's positioned inside partially enclosed rock shelters, oriented away from prevailing winds. The debris hut, one of the oldest shelter forms on Earth, exploits every principle of heat retention simultaneously. A low body-length frame is covered with progressively smaller layers of branches and leaves until the structure is effectively waterproof and windproof. The interior is stuffed with dry insulation material. The more, the better. A person inside this cocoon is surrounded on all sides by dead airspace, which is the single most effective insulator available in nature. Modern emergency bivouacs taught in military survival schools are, in their essential design, identical to structures our ancestors built 40,000 years ago. The fourth technique is celestial and environmental navigation, the ability to determine direction, track position, and orient oneself across vast distances without any instrument. For the overwhelming majority of human history, there were no compasses, no sextants, no maps, and yet, our ancestors routinely traversed thousands of kilometers, across featureless steppe, through dense forest, over open ocean. With a reliability that still impresses researchers, the sun rises in the east and sets in the west. This is common knowledge, but our ancestors extracted far more information from the sun's arc than simple compass direction. The angle of the sun above the horizon indicates latitude. The speed at which a shadow moves reveals the time of day with surprising accuracy. A stick driven vertically into the ground, the simplest possible instrument, produces a shadow that traces an east-west line across the morning and afternoon. This technique, sometimes called a shadow compass, requires nothing but patience, and it works anywhere on Earth between the Arctic and Antarctic circles. At night, and the stars provided an even more precise system. Polaris, the North Star, sits within 1 degree of true north in the northern hemisphere and has done so with minor precession drift for the entire span of modern human existence. In the southern hemisphere, the Southern Cross and its pointer stars offer a reliable south-finding method, but our ancestors went beyond fixed-point navigation, and Aboriginal Australians developed songlines, vast oral maps encoded in narrative and music, that described routes spanning thousands of kilometers across the outback, incorporating landmarks, water sources, seasonal variations, and celestial positions into a single integrated system of wayfinding. These were not rough approximations. They were precise enough to be followed by someone who had never walked the route before, guided only by the song. Polynesian navigators achieved something arguably more extraordinary. They crossed the open Pacific, the largest featureless expanse on Earth, using a system that combined star positions, wave patterns, the flight paths of migratory birds, and the color of the ocean surface to pinpoint islands separated by thousands of kilometers of open water. When European explorers first encountered Polynesian wayfinding, they assumed it was guesswork. Modern analysis has shown that it was a navigational science of remarkable precision, passed orally across generations with almost zero degradation. The navigator Mau Piai Lug, one of the last traditional wayfinders of Satawal, demonstrated in 1976 that he could sail from Hawaii to Tahiti, over 4,000 kilometers, using only traditional methods. He arrived within sight of his target. The fifth technique is wound treatment and natural medicine, a domain in which prehistoric knowledge was far more advanced than we typically assume. The popular image of early humans suffering helplessly from injuries and infections is contradicted by a growing body of archaeological and ethnobotanical evidence. Neanderthals, not even our own species but our closest relatives, were using medicinal plants at least 50,000 years ago. Worn dental calculus analysis from the El Cidrón cave in Spain revealed traces of yarrow and chamomile, both of which are bitter, nutritionally worthless plants with well-documented anti-inflammatory and antiseptic properties. These were not foods, they were medicines, consumed deliberately. Our own species went considerably further. Honey, one of the most powerful natural antibiotics known, has been used for wound treatment for at least 8,000 years, based on rock art depictions of honey harvesting. Many plantain leaves, Plantago major, contain allantoin, a compound that promotes cell growth and tissue repair, and they have been used as poultices across nearly every culture that encountered them. Sphagnum moss, abundant in northern climates, is naturally antiseptic and highly absorbent. It was used as wound dressing from the Mesolithic period through World War I. The principle behind all of these treatments is the same one that governs modern wound care. Keep the wound clean, prevent bacterial colonization, and maintain a moist environment that supports tissue regeneration. Our ancestors discovered this protocol empirically through thousands of years of observation, and their solutions, honey, moss, astringent bark teas, poultice wraps, remain medically valid today. The sixth technique is weather prediction through environmental observation. In a world without forecasts, without satellites, without barometers, the ability to anticipate weather shifts was not a convenience. It was a survival imperative. A sudden storm in open terrain could be lethal. An unexpected freeze could destroy a season's forage provisions. Our ancestors needed to predict weather accurately, and they developed a system of indicators that modern meteorology has largely confirmed. Cloud reading was the foundation. High, thin cirrus clouds moving from the west signal an approaching warm front and rain within 24 to 48 hours. A halo around the moon, caused by ice crystals in high-altitude cirrostratus, is one of the most reliable rain predictors in temperate climates with a roughly 75% accuracy rate. Cumulonimbus towers building in the afternoon mean thunderstorms within hours, but our ancestors also used biological indicators. And birds fly lower before storms because insects, their food, are pushed down by falling barometric pressure. Frogs croak more intensely before rain because increased humidity makes their skin more permeable and their calls carry further. Pine cones close in humid air and open in dry air, acting as natural hygrometers. And the smell of soil and vegetation intensifies before rain because falling pressure releases trapped gases from the ground, a phenomenon called petrichor when the rain actually arrives. None of this is folklore. Every one of these observations is grounded in atmospheric physics and biology. Our ancestors did not understand the mechanisms, but they cataloged the correlations with extraordinary precision. A skilled observer using only these indicators can predict local weather changes 6 to 12 hours in advance with an accuracy that rivals a basic forecast model. The seventh technique is food identification and preservation, the vast, painstakingly accumulated knowledge of which plants, fungi, insects, and animal parts are safe to eat, which are toxic, and how to transform marginal or dangerous foods into nourishing staples. This is perhaps the most underestimated body of knowledge in human history. There are approximately 400,000 species of plants on Earth. Roughly 300,000 of them are inedible or toxic to humans. Identifying the safe ones, and more critically identifying the lethal ones, required a database of botanical knowledge that was accumulated over millennia and transmitted with extraordinary fidelity across generations. The consequences of error were immediate and severe. A single meal of water hemlock can kill an adult in hours. A handful of castor beans contains enough ricin to be fatal. Our ancestors built this knowledge base one observation at a time, and the cost was paid in human lives. But identification was only the beginning. Preservation was the skill that made long-term survival possible. Smoking, drying, salting, fermenting, burying in cold ground, submerging in fat. Every one of these techniques was developed in prehistory and remained the primary means of food preservation until the invention of canning in 1810. The Inuit practice of fermenting seal meat in buried pouches, a technique at least 2,000 years old, produces a nutrient-dense food that remains stable for months in sub-zero conditions. Aboriginal Australians ground toxic cycad seeds into flour, and then leached the toxins out through repeated washing, a multi-step chemical detoxification process that required precise knowledge and patience. The sophistication of these methods is staggering. They involve controlled microbiology, chemical transformation, atmospheric manipulation, and a deep understanding of decay processes, all developed without any formal scientific framework. When modern food scientists analyze traditional preservation methods, they consistently find that the techniques are not merely adequate, they are optimal for the available materials and conditions. Pemmican, a mixture of dried meat, rendered fat, and sometimes dried berries, was developed by indigenous peoples of North America and remains one of the most calorie-dense, shelf-stable foods ever created. A properly made batch can last years without refrigeration. The United States military studied it extensively during both world wars. And the knowledge went deeper still. Fermentation, the controlled use of microbial activity to transform food, was practiced across every inhabited continent. Korean kimchi, Icelandic hakarl, Amazonian cassava beer, African fermented millet. These are not independent inventions. They are expressions of a universal human insight that certain forms of controlled decay do not destroy food but enhance it, making nutrients more bioavailable, killing harmful bacteria through acid production, all and extending shelf life by months or years. Our ancestors were practicing microbiology. They simply did not call it that. There is a profound irony in the modern wilderness survival industry. Every year, millions of dollars are spent on gear, gadgets, courses, and guides designed to teach people how to survive in the outdoors. The curriculum, stripped to its essentials, consists almost entirely of skills that a Paleolithic teenager would have considered basic knowledge: fire, water, shelter, in direction, wound care, weather, food. These are not innovations, they are inheritances, the accumulated survival intelligence of a species that spent 97% of its existence living in direct, unmediated contact with the natural world. What we lost was not the information itself. The plants have not changed, the stars have not moved. The physics of fire, insulation, and water flow remain exactly as they were 50,000 years ago. Yet what we lost was the habit of paying attention, the constant lifelong practice of reading the environment as a text written in wind, light, sound, soil, and the behavior of every living thing around us. Our ancestors were not geniuses, they were observers. They watched the world with an intensity and a patience that we have largely abandoned in favor of instruments that watch it for us. The trade-off is familiar. Civilization gave us security, comfort, medicine, art, science, and the luxury of not needing to know which mushroom will kill us. But it also severed a connection that was, for the vast majority of our existence, the defining feature of being human. The ability to walk into any landscape on Earth with nothing but our knowledge and survive. We gained climate-controlled rooms and lost the ability to read clouds. We gained supermarkets and lost the ability to distinguish 100 edible plants by leaf shape alone. We gained GPS and lost the patience to watch a shadow move across the ground. This is not nostalgia. It is an observation about what we traded and what we received. The trade was, on balance, favorable. No serious person would argue otherwise. But it was not free. And in the moments when the technology fails, when the phone dies, when the trail disappears, when the weather turns and the car is still miles away, the debt comes due. In those moments, the skills that kept our species alive for 300 millennia are not relics of a primitive past. They are the most tested, most refined, most reliable body of practical knowledge our species has ever produced. The skills are still there, embedded in the same laws of nature that governed our ancestors' world.